Welcome everyone. This is number 4 of our webinar series through the Brain Health Arc. I'm Terry Quinn from Glasgow, so I help run the Arc. We've got what I think is going to be a great session this lunchtime with David sharing his experiences as starting as a lecturer. So what we'll do is I'm going to just take a couple of minutes to tell you a little bit about the Arc. For those of you who've joined the other webinars, this will be old news, but looking at the list, there are some new people joining us. So hopefully some of this will be of interest to you. And then Professor Bettina Platt will introduce our main speaker, Dr. David Koss, and we've got lots of time for Q&A at the end. So let me just see if I can share my screen. So if I do this, and then I do this, and maybe do this, how's that? Are people seeing a slide?
Yes.
Okay, so this will literally only take 5 minutes, but just to let people know, the Brain Health Arc is funded by the Scottish Funding Council, and we've got a remit around trying to develop and support brain health research in Scotland. And we do that in lots of different ways, one of them being this webinar series. And brain health in Scotland, I think, is really starting to make a mark globally. And I can say that with some confidence because there's a special issue of Scientific American just came out, and it's got a whole section on Scotland and all of the great stuff that's happening in Scotland. So all of us dementia and brain health researchers this side of the border in the UK, I think, can hold our heads up high, because what we're doing is being recognised internationally. So what specifically are Brain Health Arc doing? Well, as I mentioned, we're doing this webinar series. We surveyed early career researchers and we asked them, what do you want to hear about? And then we used that to create this suite of talks. Previously, we've had talks on how to get a grant, how to get a paper, how to move into industry. And all of those talks are on the website, so you can view them at your leisure. Today, we've got David telling us about starting out as a new lecturer. And we've got the last in this year's series, which will be in June, which is about people with lived experience. What else can we offer? Well, excitingly, we can offer a data set. So you can't have helped but seen in the lay press last month, lots of headlines about a blood test for Alzheimer's. Well, the study that informed that headline is complete. And the Brain Health Arc have been given all of the individual patient level data. And we've worked to make that open access, completely open access. So if you'd like to work with a data set that really has cutting edge biomarker data, it's there. And you can just let us know and we can facilitate your access. And we know that doing research like that costs. It needs some money to get it going. So the Brain Health Arc have some money to share. I need to caveat that by saying we don't have lots of money to share, but we've got some. So we have a seed funding scheme. If you need money for things like a PPI group or a focus group or a writing retreat, we can help support that. And then with the CSO and RS McDonald, we are going to run a larger grant funding scheme looking at giving out awards of about 25,000 for pilot type work. The other thing we do is we hold meetings. So we have a meeting next week. We've had some cancellations, so there are still places for that meeting if you're interested. It's a meeting around how lifestyle and brain health interact. And then later in the summer, one of the highlights, I think, of the Dementia Conference calendar is the joint meeting that we're going to have between Scottish Dementia Research Consortium, the Brain Health Arc, and NHS Research Scotland Dementia. And that's going to be in Dundee, 13th to 14th of June. So for all of these things, and lots of other things, you'll find details on our website. You can also follow us on the platform that was previously known as Twitter, and is now X. And you can also follow us on LinkedIn. So that's my little reminder about all the cool stuff that Brain Health Arc does. But I'm really just a distraction from the main event, which is David, but I will now let Bettina just introduce David. So Bettina, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm sorry, my camera for some reason is not working, but it's a great pleasure to chair this session. And I've been involved with the SDRC, the Brain Arc, and so on for many years. And it's a particularly great pleasure today to welcome and introduce David Koss. He's a former student and staff member here at Aberdeen. And I'm very keen to find out more about his more recent experiences and his journey. But I really don't want to introduce him much further because that's his story to tell, and I'm sure he will introduce himself. So without further ado, I'll just hand over, and I look forward to the presentation, and then I'll be chairing the Q&A afterwards. David, over to you.
Hi, thank you very much. Let me just start sharing my screen. There we go. Is this coming through okay?
You're on slide view there.
Yeah. This perfect. This fine. Yeah, okay. Well, hello, I'm David Koss, and I've just effectively started as a new lecturer at the University of Dundee. I just want to take the moment to thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity to kind of share some of my experiences with you guys. Now, the first thing I really want to start is with a bit of a disclaimer. So the reason why I was interested in kind of doing this is really because my career path has never really been particularly straightforward. And I think that by kind of being a bit open about my experiences in terms of kind of, the various postdoc roles, some successes, some failures, then perhaps it could be quite inspiring for a number of you in thinking, well, even if I don't have the most kind of straightforward career trajectory, then I can still achieve a lectureship. So really, I've spent a huge amount of time thinking of myself as an ECR, and I was certainly feeling as if I was destined to be an ECR well into when my hair finally goes. The other thing I would like to stress is that, many times throughout this journey, I've thought that perhaps I actually should do something else. And on occasions, others have told me, actually, you should probably do something else as well. So I appreciate fully how difficult it is to make a career in research. And I don't want to come across smug about this, I only really started the lab in September. And so I would say that it's really too soon to judge whether I have a full, complete range of successful tips for setting out as a lecturer and as a kind of independent researcher. And there might be some times where potentially this seems a little bit self-indulgent. And again, I don't really mean to show off. I'm trying to tell you kind of my story, and perhaps there'll be things that you can kind of relate to. And I think you can hopefully learn from some of my experiences. So really what I want to cover in this is really my kind of research background, what's kind of led up to applying for a lectureship position, but also actually the process of applying for this, how I spotted the position and the actual application itself, and also how I kind of sought to kind of present my research themes. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about the reality of being a lecturer as well. And then hopefully we'll have lots of time for questions afterwards. So this is me. This is my, I would say, rather slightly creepy looking. Oh, is there still some feedback? No, it's fine. Okay, I was appointed recently at the University of Dundee. I'm a neuroscience lecturer with teaching and research responsibilities, and I'm currently kind of setting out at the start of my 3-year probation period. And over those 3 years, I'll effectively be assessed on both my contribution to research, teaching, as well as community and leadership skills. And we'll look at that in a little bit later. Primarily, my research focus, which I'm not really going to talk about, is using post-mortem human tissue to investigate roles of DNA damage in a variety of neurodegenerative diseases. So just as a kind of introduction to my research background, this is a kind of typical slide I usually put up whenever I'm introducing myself. So I'm from Aberdeen originally. I did my PhD in Aberdeen and started my postdoc in 2008, I think, in Bettina Platt's lab, but also with her husband, Gernot Riddell. I then usually just say, well, in 2018, I moved to Newcastle University. This was to effectively set up a new lab for an external professor, Professor Tiago Otero. He actually had a lab in Germany and had been offered a position at Newcastle where he could continue and do additional research. During that time, I worked with a number of neurodegenerative experts in the field, and then I usually finish by saying, and this is really what's led to my position at the University of Dundee. But in reality, the kind of career course has not been quite as straightforward. I did my first postdoc at Bettina's lab, and then I think in around 2012, I was offered a position. I applied for a postdoc position at the Max Planck Institute in Hamburg, and this was a really quite prestigious lab. But actually, when I arrived there, I found the situation to be a nightmare. I really did not enjoy the work environment, and many of the people who were actually in the lab were very unhappy as a result of the toxicity that was there. So I did what I thought was unthinkable. And even just after 1 year into a 3-year position, I left and returned back to Aberdeen. I was very fortunate enough that Bettina was open to take me back in a sense, where I continued to work for a number of years. I then in 2018 did actually move to Newcastle University to set up Tiago's lab. But really, this kind of dynamic really lasted about 2 years, and the two of us kind of worked together to apply to the Lewy Body Society in order for me to get some kind of independent funding. Now, we were successful, but this was 2020, and of course we had COVID, and so actually, even if this funding was for 1 year, being unsure of the funding landscape, I actually decided it was better to split this 50-50 over 2 years, whilst also working with Dr. Fiona LeBeau and Takeda Pharmaceuticals in developing some organotypic culture, slice culture work. And really, it was from that point that I then ended up at the University of Dundee. So as you can see, it's never quite a linear progression and never quite a straightforward movement into one position into the next. So I really wanted to highlight a variety of, I guess, benefits that I found from working in different labs. I've said that, you know, I did my PhD and initial postdoc with Bettina Platt and Gernot Riddell. And I think really working in their lab was very, very formative for me. I was exposed to a huge array of techniques, both in terms of behavior, but also in terms of biochemical and electrophysiological approaches. Bettina was really, really encouraging and allowed me to kind of pursue various side projects, which I think was very beneficial. Not only to developing my research skills, but also my independent research exploration. Additionally, there was a number of international collaborations that I could participate in. It was actually in my first postdoc position where I gained my first lecturing experience. And of course, there was grant writing associated with that. Moving to Newcastle to work with Tiago Otero and really set up a lab. I mean, I think that was really critical. It gave me this amazing experience of starting a lab really from scratch. When I arrived, we had no equipment, no tissue, and no funding. And so there were some real challenges with this, but really it gave me a kind of almost a safe space really to explore and free rein to drive research. In addition to that, actually, Newcastle is excellent and world leading in dementia with Lewy bodies and have a really strong post-mortem neuropath specialization. And again, this was things that was just adding to my research skill set, if you like. And finally, working with Fiona LeBeau, we were really pushing and developing different novel techniques. In fact, we were developing this human cortical organotypic platform and repurposing it really essentially from protocols that had been developed by someone within the lab, Dr. Faye McLeod, who'd been using it for epilepsy research. And so that really exposed myself to a huge kind of cross-theme collaboration. And in addition to that, I had some experience with working, maybe not in industry, but with industry in terms of projects. And what I would say is, and I could have put up so many more people, numerous people from Bettina's lab, numerous people from Gern's lab, but really across the board, what I found to be really key in my own development was a supportive network. Not only just with my peers, so Dr. Lauren Walker, Daniel Erskine, Faye McLeod, but also with other members of the department who have really been kind of championing me and providing me with advice and tips as to progress. So I think when people think about career trajectories, people are often talking about applying for fellowships. My own personal experience, I think I really applied for fellowships too late in my career. The first application I actually applied for was in 2015. So sometime about 5 or 6 years after I'd obtained my PhD. And at that point, the only thing that was available to me because of time limits was a senior fellowship. And I applied for this with the Alzheimer's Society, exploring unfolded protein response in Alzheimer's disease. I was shortlisted and interviewed, but I didn't get it. In 2016, again, unfazed or phased but recovered, I applied again for senior fellowships, AR UK and Alzheimer's Society, but I didn't get it. I took a bit of a break in terms of applying for fellowships, but off the back of our funding from the Lewy Body Society, I put together a fellowship package and applied for funding. I didn't get it. And then in just towards the end, or roughly about the same time, I applied for Newcastle University's own internal fellowships, and I didn't get it. And really, I think, fellowships for me have been a great source of just staring into the abyss. And I would say that probably some of my problems with that is either the way that I package myself. Some people do really, really well in terms of going through these fellowship processes. Others seem to have a different approach that doesn't seem to yield success. But that's not to take away from the fact that researchers who don't have fellowships can't do very valid work. I would also say that really because I started very late in applying, that I would suggest that postdocs should be applying for junior fellowships very, very early. What I was more successful at achieving was small grants and pilot grants. Obviously, I applied to a variety of area network funds, and these were to kind of develop either new projects, but also project offshoots. And this really gave me some experience with grant writing, but also critically some level of ownership over the ideas. I appreciate the fact that nowadays that perhaps summer studentships are probably not so available now, but these were really fantastic schemes that again allowed me to kind of push my research ideas and to gain some supervising experience, again with ownership directly under my name. I had a number of success applying for pilot and project grants. This, again, was giving me experience of driving grant writing and developing data for fellowships or for future applications, as well as reaching out and getting in touch with external collaborators. Now, I've highlighted ownership because, of course, many of these projects, and to the great kind of frustration of many people, is that these projects typically are submitted under the PI's name or someone with tenure. I would say that I probably should have been applying for many more grants, small grants throughout. And I think that, even if not successful, these would have been further honing my skills for grant writing. I think I was also probably a little bit too hung up on the fact that I was submitting grants under my supervisor's name. And realistically, people in academia know the score. They know that if you're driving the research, the chances are that you're heavily contributing to developing the research plans. And in terms of actually stating that on the CV, I think you can always state yourself as a co-applicant, but also indicate that you were the primary author or project a conceiver, if you like. And kind of the last little bit about my background is really that during that time, as a postdoc, I undertook a variety of different non-research roles. For several years, I was the ECR representative for Scotland in terms of Alzheimer's Research UK. And I did that together with Laura Aitken at St Andrews, but also Chris Henstridge, who was present at the time in Edinburgh. I also was able to take part in a variety of different external research placements, doing some work in the Nensky Institute in Poland, but also in Bordeaux, and later some teaching experiences in summer schools. Of course, there was a variety of different public engagement events, as well as peer engagement, and even some engagement into authoring some basic science material for clinicians. And really, the reason that I put this slide up together is really that these roles, although not directly related to research, were one, increasing my research network, allowing me to get out there and to meet a variety of people, but also teaching me highly important skills that would be later on for the role of lectureship in terms of leading research outside of my kind of home comfort of the internal lab, as well as teaching a variety of different students from across the world. So just kind of some key tips that I guess you can kind of look back on after this is that I think variety is the key to research experience. Obviously, moving from lab to lab is increasing your technical experience. And when I say moving from lab to lab, I don't necessarily mean moving physical location. I know many of us have commitments and have set up roots in where we're based, but certainly moving around in terms of the department and working with a number of people, I think really helps develop your independence as well as your networking. And I think it's also important to try different lab environments to establish which environment suits you best. Certainly, there are people that I know that work incredibly well under intense pressure, and I'm not one of them. I certainly favor a kind of more kind of relaxed approach. And this is something that I've really learned through working in these different environments. I think obviously the support of group and network is critical. Lots of these opportunities, as well as great science, come from discussion with peers. And I think also in terms of working in a field with kind of shared ambition, there are often times where competition can kind of flare up. And I would actually recommend that you just address this directly and have a conversation with people you feel that you may have significant overlaps with. I would also say that writing grants early is highly important. and also becoming involved in a range of non-research roles. I'm actually terrible at networking for the sake of networking, but what I am good at is speaking to people whilst we're doing another task. And so I think that the only way that I really managed to grow my network is being involved in some of these non-research roles. But also looking back now, I appreciate the fact that I've developed so many transferable skills. And I think that really this background, and the reason why I'm saying this, is kind of all these things that you're doing will help you become ready to apply for a permanent position. So in terms of actually spotting an opening and where I was when I applied for my now position, this was around 2022, and I was really looking for making a move past being a postdoc. I certainly was experiencing that fatigue of short-term contracts and job instability. And often, people hope that their university that they're hosted at are going to offer them a position, or a position will come up. But I would say that actually, in my experience, most universities are really insecure. They only ever want to seem to hire from outside. And so it's so they can say, look at this new idea that we've brought in, look at who we've managed to attract. But in fact, they're only ever going to offer people a position who's already based at the university if they have a better offer. So for me at the time, I was just effectively looking around. I was in some conversations with industry. So I was discussing with people at Concept Life Sciences about potentially making the change. I'd known from my own network, variety of people that I would speak to at conferences, that the University of Exeter was looking and had actually already done a round of lectureship positions, and was getting feedback that people were surprised that I hadn't actually applied. And so that was really the kind of incentive that I needed to give me the confidence to apply at the University of Dundee. When I actually saw the position, this is just the effective heading of what I saw. It was really quite appealing to me because it was both teaching and research, and certainly it was something that I was interested in pursuing. So before I even started to kind of apply, I actually reached out to Professor Tim Hales, knowing that this would be the person that I would report to. I don't think I'd ever met him before, but simply just made some inquiries, gave him a kind of very brief couple of sentences about who I was and whether I would be considered as competitive for the position. Also, and I guess this is a bit of a kind of callback, is that I knew that Chris Henstridge had set up his own lab at Dundee, and through my non-researching tasks or roles, I'd known Chris through our ECR work. So I involved or arranged an informal chat. Also, in order to kind of tie in with my research ambitions, I contacted the facilities that were present there, including the Tayside Centre of Genomic Analysis, just to get an idea of what kind of techniques and platforms they had. I also obviously spent a long time speaking with my supportive network of people. I also reached out to some individuals who were teaching lecturers at the University of Newcastle to really gain an idea of what kind of things it is that they would be looking for in an application. In terms of the application, there was only 3 documents that I really had to prepare. I think we all know how to put together a CV, and I mean, you probably all know how to put together a research statement, but at least what I kind of aimed to do was to provide a kind of cohesive research history and plan. I was aware that really I couldn't go into too much detail about my recent publications or whatever, but tried to kind of form a cohesive narrative about the various research I'd done. So I'd worked in Alzheimer's disease, I'd worked in dementia with Lewy bodies, and I'd looked at a variety of cellular stress systems, and that's really how I pitched it. I highlighted complementary research that was going on at the University of Dundee and projects. So I spent quite a long time looking into the various members that were at the School of Medicine and how I felt that I could actually complement their ongoing work. I've already said that I spoke to core facilities and indicated how I would actually make use of these facilities. Before finally kind of trying to establish myself as being able to bring something unique. And in my case, this was an interest in dementia with Lewy bodies, as well as some training in establishing organotypic cell culture. In terms of the teaching statements, again, I highlighted both experience in terms of formal teaching, so giving lectures, working in tutorials, etc., but also informal opportunities. So things like just training and support of peers, even showing people new software, etc. But also the supervision of undergrads and PhDs and postdocs, and particularly in terms of highlighting student involvement. Actually, in my CV, I went on to highlight the names of students who then subsequently got their names on papers to demonstrate that there was a kind of measurable outcome of my supervision. Equally, I did quite a lot of research into the courses and topics that were being taught at the university, and identified specific modules and courses in which I could deliver lectures, and even went so far to suggest that I would deliver a new lecture on dementia with Lewy bodies. So in terms of interview prep, I think some people often just skip the basic essentials of just contacting career services. They didn't really provide anything that was specific to the lectureship role, but certainly it was nice to kind of brush up on how to present yourself and how to come across well in interview. I actually planned 2 mock interviews, and the idea behind this was that I really wanted to practice as much as possible, but also I wanted to make sure that the worst experience I had was at the mock level and not when I actually got through to the actual interview itself. I had one which was intended to be supportive, so this was my support network, if you like. And for the second one, I actually reached out to very high achievers within the department who I hadn't necessarily worked with before, in order so that they could give me a real grilling and give me the kind of almost worst case scenario. And to be honest, I shouldn't be really worried, because it was my support network that really kicked me to the floor during the mock interviews. But I think that this was really, really important. I was asked to give a presentation. In fact, I was given the title, which was to produce sustainable research with high impact at Dundee, and it was a 10-minute talk. So just to kind of highlight really what this kind of comprised of, I really went for generalized themes. I'm working in DNA damage and neurodegeneration. I sold this as something that could be applicable across the neurodegenerative spectrum, and also demonstrated that DNA damage could have many different neurodegenerative relative outcomes. I only had 1 slide to highlight recent data highlights, and never really went into anything particularly technical. You know, this interview panels typically involve people that are not even neurodegenerative researchers and not even neuroscientists. I highlighted some ability to build capacity, but actually where I think was really important was to describe principal goals and a realistic funding plan of where I would aim to bring in research capital. Equally, I looked for specific goals in which I could achieve within a 5-year time window. And as I was doing this, I was also outlining specifics of individuals and core facilities at the University of Dundee in which I could engage with. And then ultimately, I tied this back to really the sustainability and reproducibility. So I don't know if this approach is really what sealed the deal, but hopefully that's something that's perhaps useful for you guys. I guess to kind of highlight a few more tips, I suppose to be aware of where is hiring. In addition to staff turnover, I think it's important to know which universities are looking to grow their neuroscience department. Always listen to what people are saying in your network. And in terms of actually preparing to apply, I would say, your first port of call should always be to reach out informally, understand really the institute that you're applying to, what they're interested in, and what the core facilities are, and how you can make use of that. I would say that actually probably seeking as much advice as possible, and to really prepare for interviews over and over again is something that's essential. Perhaps this advice seems very straightforward, but to me, it was things that I kind of thought of for the first time in applying for this role. And in terms of presenting yourself, I think broad strokes only. Presenting very complicated data in a job interview is really not necessary. And they have a list of your publications, but also planning for the future and really providing a plan of how you're going to integrate and build capacity at an institute is again something that I think they're looking for. So, and this is the kind of last bit of my talk, is really that I was successful. I was hired to the University of Dundee, and that was in September. And really, since that point, the realities of becoming a lecturer and leading research has really taken forward. Over the last 6-7 months, it's really been a case of firsts. So first conference presentation as an independent researcher, first PhD vivas, and indeed first lectures. So actually, in terms of teaching was a relatively new challenge to me. I had the opportunity in Aberdeen to be able to give 2 one-hour lectures towards final year biomedical students regarding kinases and phosphatases in neuronal signaling and disease. And looking back, I would say I did that reasonably well, but there were certainly some areas that I could improve on. I'd also had some experience in terms of being a tutor, particularly for med students as student select components. And of course, I taught at various practical classes and done report marking as well as student supervision. In Newcastle, actually, my formal teaching was minimal. I wasn't really integrated very much into the teaching side of things. And in fact, it was predominantly bench-side supervision that I'd done. However, I was able to take advantage of opportunities to teach at summer schools. And again, I think that this really added to my ability to engage with a variety of students at different levels. So at the School of Medicine where I'm based, all staff are really expected to do some level of teaching. How much teaching really depends on the overheads that they're pulling in from external grants. And there is a bit of flexibility in this. In my contract, there's actually not a defined amount of time. Often there is a defined amount of time in which you're expected to do research. I am teaching and research, so this is unlike a 5-year tenure track position where the emphasis is more on research. So I'm expected to do a fair bit of teaching, but how much of that, again, still depends on my grant income and publications. So I appreciate that this is a little bit messy here, but just to give you an idea of the kind of teaching load that I've had, I'm teaching across effectively 4 different courses and in 5 different modules. And I have a variety of different responsibilities, including being module lead. So that's effectively doing admin and being content manager, but also delivering lectures on Alzheimer's disease and dementia with Lewy bodies, but also on wider sweeping topics, including memory formation, synaptic plasticity, and placing grid cells as well. In addition to that, I'm involved in the Curriculum Review Board and the Neuroscience Representative. Effectively, the University of Dundee is trying to revamp their third and fourth year biomedical sciences teaching. And this has involved really just a kind of one monthly meeting to discuss our kind of learning outcomes and how our current lecture strategy is fitting in with this. In addition to that, I'm expected to do a postgraduate certificate in academic practice in higher education. The start date of that was September, and since I just started at the time, I left that for next year. But within this 3-year period, I'll be due to undertake this course. Really, I just wanted to highlight, I mean, when I first joined, I didn't really know what a module lead involved. Really, it's effectively uploading a lot of top content to various online servers for students to access, to organize tutorial groups and set assessments, exams, etc. And answering students' questions. And at least in, this seems to have changed from my time. I don't really remember asking many questions or sending emails to lecturers that much as an undergraduate, but nowadays they really ask a lot. In terms of the lectures, actually, when I first arrived, the majority of content was really already written for me, and the majority was previously recorded. Now, I could have chosen just to go with the material as was, but I actually felt like I would do a better job if I rewrote the lectures on Alzheimer's disease. I was really, going to be able to deliver the most useful amount of information if it was really coming from my viewpoint. I'd also suggest I was going to kind of write a novel or a new lecture on dementia with Lewy bodies, and I had the opportunity to do that, which I actually thoroughly enjoyed and learnt many kind of sides and aspects of the disease of which I'd not yet covered. In terms of mapping memories, so learning in memory and synaptic plasticity, it's not really my focus, and I did have to spend quite a long time learning the lecture material. I actually found this really quite enjoyable, and if it wasn't new to me, I was certainly remembering some of this from my undergraduate days. There is a emphasis on obviously having to do lots of assessments for the undergraduate students, and this really does take up most of the teaching time, at least in my experience. And I think it's been important for me to learn how to set assessments wisely and to kind of gain or to judge a balance between what will benefit the students the most and what I can really mark at a high level. Essays are great, but if you have 40 to 50 essays on one single topic, it's real torture to sit there and just go through them over and over. I would say also I was caught out actually in one of the modules. I took this over from someone previously, and their assessment was to choose any relevant paper from the last 10 years and write a news and views article on this. I simply really struggled to be able to cover the breadth of articles that the students chose and to be able to kind of return that in time and with meaningful comments. So I'll be changing this in the future. And sometimes it's just the luck of the draw. I have another essay question in a module alongside other essay questions, and sometimes the students just choose to do your essay. And that can really sink your week effectively as you try to manage the workload. In terms of research, and this is moving towards the end of my talk, it's much more familiar ground. Obviously, overseeing a variety of different aspects of work at Aberdeen, but also setting up the lab in Newcastle has really helped. This is actually a photo of how at least one part of the lab looks at the moment, as in full of stuff, which is great. And And I was very fortunate, but I was also quite aware that moving up to a new lab, I would really have nothing to start with. And in fact, I have continued work ongoing with Tiago down in Newcastle. And so I was able to kind of keep hold of and transfer small consumables without necessarily dipping into my startup. I was also really fortunate during my time in Newcastle, where I was doing a side project with Gabby Skoretsky, who actually retired during my time and left me several bits and pieces. And when I say bits and pieces, I mean a cooled centrifuge and some gel tanks. And this has really been very useful for me. I did ask the school to buy me some pipettes. So these are our very first sets of pipettes in the lab. And that's been great, as well as kind of local PIs and research fellows who've been very supportive. I must say that Chris Henstridge has been incredibly helpful, not only in just helping me get set up, but also if I find myself that I don't quite have the right reagent, it's perhaps not compatible with systems that are up and running in Dundee, he's always willing to share. In terms of my actual startup package from the School of Medicine, I am provided a funded PhD student. I've actually waited quite a while to advertise this, knowing that most keen students effectively have things lined up from December, January to start the following year in September. But I did advertise. I advertised on Twitter, and I advertised via the school, who advertised in Find a PhD. I also encouraged all my applicants to speak informally with me. I think this is really important because really a 1 hour or even 30-minute formal interview is not long enough to really get to know someone. I also think it's important to set expectations. I was very clear to say to potential students that I'm setting up my lab. I'm a little bit of an unknown quantity, because when I have people come to work with me, I want them to know that what kind of position that they're getting into. And I think it's really important to establish that they're a good fit for the lab. I had about 20 applicants, and about 15 were good on paper. I held my interviews towards the end of December, and I think that was a big mistake. It didn't really give me enough time to formalize a lot of the paperwork, and probably took longer to get back to candidates based on my decision. But nevertheless, I've been very fortunate, found Athena, who will start in September, and I'm really excited to see what she will do. I'm not going to go into this because I'm running a bit late. But in terms of applying for external funding, of course, there are many different places that I'm looking at the moment. They're all welcome to give me as much money as they want. But really, my initial strategy is to develop successful kind of independence with good outputs using short, low-cost projects. So, and when I say low cost, I'm talking in the regions of 100,000 to 150,000 pounds. These are going to be primarily based on charities. These won't be overheads, so they won't protect my time from teaching, but they will fund research staff and PhD students. And so once I have this portfolio, the plan would be then to kind of build forward and look at into future leaders awards with salary contributions. How am I doing so far? Well, I was when I first took up the position, I very quickly applied for a large grant from Tenerife, Scotland. I was actually really fortunate to actually have this awarded, and I'm currently hiring for a one-year postdoc to investigate a variety of different biochemical changes within the nucleus associated with neurodegeneration. I also utilized the local networks and have applied for small PI grants, which again I was awarded. And then actually with Chris Henstridge, we applied for a joint PhD studentship, and we didn't get it. It was rejected in January. As a co-applicant with my network from Newcastle, I have at the moment a full application in for these NC3R project. I've also tried to apply for the Academy of Sciences Springboard Award. I didn't get it, didn't make it past internal triage, and recently put in a grant to the Lewy Body Society, and I'm awaiting the outcome of that. So in terms of obtaining money and kickstarting research, I think it's too early to say, although at least I'm applying. In terms of the actual research that's going on at the moment, we have started our first experiments. I had an undergraduate med student who did a 3-month dissertation placement, Lucas Finlay. I would say that in my experience, this was tricky. I had no team and actually limited time to really supervise them in the lab. But initially, we did our first experiments, and I would say that, oh, 1 second, sorry. And we kind of got there in the end with some interesting data. Next week, I have Ben Graham, who will start as a kind of short-term 4-week placement, who will come back in summer. And I have a master's student, Jocelyn, who will join to kind of drive things forward a little bit more. And I also have a co-supervised master's student with Chris Hensford. So, and hopefully over the summer, this should be a bit easier as I don't have any teaching commitments. In terms of output, again, I've been fortunate with the number of papers that I've been able to submit with my Dundee association. I know that's probably a little bit smug, but I think it's important to, you know, to say that the papers are still very important, particularly to capitalize on funders, but also it shows the benefits of a variety of side projects I was working on and student supervision. And the last slide that I really have here is to talk about leadership and community. And this is another thing that I'll be effectively judged on during my probation period. One of the roles that's beginning to become really important to me is public engagement. So I've become the public engagement lead for AR UK's Scottish network. And we're trying to develop a number of different projects. And for anyone who's interested in this, I'd be really happy if they were to email me to look at engaging not just the public, but actually those with lived experience with dementia. And then just to end on a kind of meta note is that, you know, obviously doing this Brain Health Alliance New Lecturer is about sharing my experiences and giving something hopefully of use to the community, but also giving me the opportunity to thank so many people that have supported me throughout my kind of progression. And so with that, I'll just stop now and we can have some questions.